I'm inspired by the idea of a holistic approach to life and theosophy. And I really appreciated your words this morning, both of you actually, the way you repeatedly saw and held before us the ideal of an entirely holistic approach to theosophy of life. And that often means activating the head and the heart as well as the body and the spirit together. And that is an ideal, a balance, which I think we're all probably striving after in different ways. And the topic here today is particularly about integrating the fire of the mystic's love for God or the divine, whatever word you care to use for it, with the passion for justice of the activist. And we know that they both do what they do, they both make their offerings in the world, but this proposition I'm putting to you this afternoon is that when you combine those two fires, the result is a holy fire, the third fire, the third fire of activism, sacred activism, as an enduring fire to help the activist or the person working in the world, whether that's in a Theosophical Society or walking up and down the streets with a placard, as I have actually been known to do, sacredly of course, and to enable people with a passion to make a difference in the world and to fit themselves for service, to be able to endure the course. Because when they're doing the less steep path around the mountain or the straight up the slopes one, there are times when our endurance is truly tested. So here's a way offered to you. This is an idea which has actually been developed by Andrew Harvey. Andrew Harvey is a very well-known mystic and researcher, writer and author and speaker. Indeed, he was in New Zealand about 2 years ago and he was talking about this. The way he perceives it is that sacred activism is a force of compassion in action, destined to midwife the birth of a new humanity, to midwife the birth of a new humanity able to co-create with the divine a new world. And the concept is that not by the mystic's fire alone or the activist's fire alone, but by the two together, a new and more wonderful fire is born. So his picture begins with the perception that the world has multiple crises underway right now. And he likens it to the Great Death as being the death of the old system in its ways and its manifestations, the old paradigms, resource depletion, environmental degradation, climate change in all its different forms, the population explosion, species depletion, the increasing inequality of income and wealth and of food, and indeed the debt-ridden money system itself. The corporate controllers, those with their hands on the levers of power in the world around the place, often out of sight behind even the presidents of the nations, and the mass media, who in different ways, I think, often help to promote the present or the old paradigm. Fundamentalism of all sorts, fueling both war and politics. Again, the big corporations and their control over the mass media and the influence that they have on governments. The mighty and hugely expensive military-industrial complex, how many $1 trillion a year are spent on armaments at the moment? Just think that a fraction of that money would resolve hunger for our planet, it would resolve inequality and poverty. The way that technology itself tends to come between us and nature, like we have all these roads with the paving on them, and you maybe put a family out in nature having a picnic there, and the kids are probably looking at their devices rather than listening to the birds, this sort of thing. So in many ways, we've built this incredible bubble on the planet. Look at these wonderful things we've done. And there are some wonderful things about it, but also terrifying in the ways I've just outlined. Now, Andrew Harvey perceives, along with the great death of the old, also at the same time the growth of the new. Signs of a great birth, some of whose characteristics are these. that the world crisis itself is part of the pressure upon us to become more and more aware of what we're doing as a species on this planet, to help to strip away the false agendas and to look very deeply into our dark side as to what the psychological and spiritual causes are of all these problems rising up. So the crisis itself is both a great threat but also a great aid to our awakening. And then the things we know about, like the emerging technologies like wind energy, solar and hydrogen, even maybe free energy. I'm still waiting to see some convincing evidence of that. Now, the birth of the internet itself is a little bit like a physical manifestation of the global brain. It is a way that allows people to connect these days in communities based on interest rather than physical neighbourhood. And that's a huge development for our planet. It means that if I'm passionately interested in growing blue roses in winter, I'm bound to find some people on Facebook who have the same interest and maybe make a little group. The group might have 250 people all around the world interested in this. And likewise, there are thousands of groups linked by interest in this way. And yes, there's lots of extraordinary nonsense around the internet, but there are also some wonderful groups, spiritually oriented and those of a higher purpose, really reflecting humanity itself all around. So yes, I remember about 20 years ago, the first Theosophical discussion list ran by email. Theos-L it was called. I remember John Vossmans was one of the early pioneers in that. And I joined up with this. We had our different characters from around the world. We got to know what was happening in America and various people in England, a few New Zealanders and Aussies and so on. An incredible group, and yes, it had its wonderful discussions and its fundamentalists. There were a few of those around too, and the others at the other end of the spectrum. And it was really a good time. But I remember the first time there was a global meditation organised, and it struck me. I thought, wow, this is going to be a pretty extraordinary thing, that potentially 1 million people meditating around the world. That's got to be a significant event in our spiritual awakening. Today, now this year, you might find a dozen or 20 of these happening in the same year. And it's just extraordinary to observe this awakening spreading throughout humanity in our progression, no matter how flawed it is, towards what I believe is a global consciousness, the spiritual unity of humanity, one that the masters themselves deeply, deeply cared about, more than the individual halls of occultism and individual little groups in the Theosophical Society in the Victorian drawing rooms, as the picture often emerges in the Mahatma letters. Now here's the time when we're observing a global awakening. But at the same time, it's my belief that this is a great call to all of us, any who have a heart to do this and a soul to help in the work, to put their weight behind it in whatever your local circle is, whatever your theosophical group is. Now, Andrew Harvey was reflecting on the efficiency of the groups, or the terrorist group like Al-Qaeda, which is the group that was most visible when he first developed this idea. And you wonder why it's always the baddies, if you like, who are the ones who organise themselves into little cells and they support each other. He discovered what their techniques are, and as this slide indicates, that they would work in small cells of 6 to 12 people who would encourage and sustain each other up to date and inspire each other, read from whatever scripture inspired them, for their belief was their inspiration, meditating, whatever their cause was, no matter how distorted we might believe it was, they believed that it was a holy mission, and they were prepared to put their lives on the line and blow themselves up with bombs for it. But the point that I'm putting for you is not the intention or the purpose, but the mechanism in this case, which is that if you get groups of people working in small cells, little nuclei, where have we heard that word before? Nuclei, little nuclei within the global nucleus of humanity, are they not? Yes, I'll be talking more about networks of groups and networks of community in a moment. But he was struck by how it's the so-called baddies who use techniques that work. And why don't the good people, why don't they get together and do the same thing? So he developed the idea further into what he called sacred activism of inspired people working together in networks of grace. Networks of grace was an inspiring term that he used for that. But be inspired by whatever word you like to use for that. So here are a few quotes that support this idea. Bill McKibben, who's very well known in the world of global awareness of climate change, etc., and GE and things like that, wrote that the technology we need most badly is the technology of community, how to cooperate to get things done. Our sense of community is in disrepair. Then the time has come to harness the energies of love, and so for the second time in the history of humanity, discover fire. What an inspiring idea of fire that was, by this wonderful scientist mystic, more or less booted out of the church that he was. Sometimes I think that's a mark of a true spiritual leader. If they're booted out of the church, well, they must be doing something that is. Well, Blavatsky's so incredibly attacked and so violently opposed, even within the society, it seems almost as if it's like a boat going through water, but the front end, the sharp end of the ship, the bow has to part the waters, and of course that builds up the bow wave and the resistance. And yes, the opposition, the dark snuggles up right into the light, it seems. And I recall the example of the man who discovered the circulation of the blood in the human body, William Harvey, I think it was. And he put this idea forth, but it was so viciously opposed in his day, and apparently no doctor over the age of about 30 or 40 ever came to accept the idea. Well, there's a saying that science advances funeral by funeral, and it could be dark humour there, but it's really true, I'm afraid, often. And so those doctors played their part, they did their service and moved on, and the idea of the circulation of the blood got accepted. So, this is the idea, though, from Andrew Harvey, that what the call is as he sees it, is a grassroots movement of the fire of sacred activism in networks of grace. So let me now unfold that idea a little bit, or evolve it even. I might either unfold it or evolve it, as we heard earlier today. Sacred activists, he says, need to learn to work together and form empowering and encouraging networks of grace while pursuing their own individual kinds of service. So if you work as for animals, yes, by all means, keep working for animals, but maybe form an animal service group within the TOS, which of course already does do that sort of work. And the beings of like heart, brought together by passion, skill, and serendipity, can pool their energies and triumphs, griefs and hopes and resources of all kinds. See, he's bringing forward this idea of what makes the act of the terrorist cells works and turning it over the side of light as we perceive it. Whatever draws you together, whether it's a profession that you have in common, like lawyers who apparently in 2008, when there were millions of people expelled from their homes because they're no longer able to pay their mortgages, and their homes were foreclosed on them. Well, Andrew Harvey's idea is that why not get groups of lawyers who dedicate a portion of their time free to help people whose homes have been foreclosed on them. Or whatever the profession is, it might be doctors who want to donate a certain portion of their time to helping people who are not otherwise able to afford the time and the money to do that. Or it might be a passion, those who just really want to work for growing blue roses or helping children, or the plight of people who have been in jail and are now out on the streets again and need to make the transition back into a life and community. Whatever the passion is that you have, that is another possible cause to link people together in these groups, these little nuclei in the networks of grace. Or indeed, if it's a heartbreak, if you can wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning with your heart literally breaking because of the plight of women, alone or prisoners or the victims of war or violence, whatever it is that breaks your heart, if that's the way your mind and your spirit works at this time, then get together with other people of a kindred heart and a kindred mind. Join your hearts and minds in that way. So to recap that, it might be people linked by a profession and a skill, or linked by a passion, or a heartbreak, or whatever it is that pulls you together, and be linked in this way. Networks of groups, which is a delightful group. This is what you have anyway. It's a very natural form. It occurs right through nature. This is the way all the groups on Facebook operate and community society around. But why not have our groups for service, consciously linking as well? Because what I observe in the different Facebooks that I take part in is that a lot of people are in groups of between, say, 100 and 5,000, say, and they're all saying, we must do something, but they don't know what to do. They've got the heart for it, they've got the spirit for it, the passion for it, but what they're lacking is a focus maybe of leadership, but also of skill. So it's a time, I think, to draw together these groups into networks of nuclei, networks of groups. And I do think that we, the Theosophical Society, do have a few organisations of kindred intent these days, which have arisen in our wake, if you like, as you remarked earlier, Pablo. And so it's not a bad idea when we do already with places like the Heart Math Institute and the Institute of Noetic Sciences that Renee was blessed to be able to attend when she was in America last year. There are groups of kindred intent. I'm not saying they all have the whole vision or message of the TS, but because our purposes are broadly aligned, I think it's a move. It's a move which will potentially, the way a lodge, we've been told in our early literature that when a body of people come together to form a lodge, that the very fact that they're joined by a higher intent provides like a matrix of energy, if you like, into which the light of Buddhi, the light of the Master's blessing and power, can descend and to radiate out into the earth and to perform service beyond that which would have been possible to the prayers and the meditations of the individual people. This is an extraordinarily beautiful opportunity. This is why we do get together in groups and lodges. It is because it's like a magnifying lens. It's like once you get even 3 or 4 people, we hear different descriptions of those who say it goes up exponentially as the number of people, and we may as well accept it that. Whether it's a square law or exponential, it doesn't matter. But you put together 10 people, and then you put together 100 people, it's a lot more than 10 times the power that may be transmitted through that group matrix of the combined higher intent. And that's where we have a unity of purpose. And so what I'm saying is that principle applies to individuals walking into a room like this, providing a matrix, a lens, a beautiful lens of energies and intent. How much more so might it be groups of spiritual purpose, consciously link for these kind of purposes in the planet? I suggest to you that the possibilities are enormous, and this is one major step towards actually realising global consciousness. Because as I think you mentioned right this morning, and maybe last night, Pablo, humanity is very much at the stage of looking at its fingers, and this finger being at war with that one and saying, I'm better than you because I'm taller. The middle one is saying, I'm better than you because I've got 5 millimetres more altitude. There's all this silly stuff that I like to do, don't they just? And indeed in the Mahatma letters, there's also a reference there to a fable of poor humanity, the only one that's orphaned, the orphaned humanity, where the limbs are at warfare with each other. But if they would only realise, hey, we're different, because we can work together to do amazing things. And so with that inspiration embedded there in our literature, I'm putting to you with great enthusiasm the possibility of consciously enhancing the way we link with other groups. With care, of course, because we know there can be pathological things arise, like one group wants to take another one over and all that kind of nonsense. But there are ways of drawing boundaries appropriately between groups and establishing a respectful relationship. So where we're going now is that in view of that great crisis crisis, which was put forward like that by Andrew Harvey, but I think it's visible to all of us really, and also the possibility of the Great Birth. Where would we find an example of that process already occurring in nature? And here's one. It's called a caterpillar. A caterpillar spends its life chomping on every leaf in sight, and its only mission in life is to gobble as much as it can and get as fat as it can. Great set of purposes, wouldn't it be nice to be able to eat as much as you like without any worries in the world, and just knowing that it's our divine purpose? What a liberation it would be for a lot of us. But that's what the caterpillar does, but that blissful, idyllic state actually comes to a close when the biological clock chimes within its being. And somehow it then knows that, I've got to begin to weave myself a little house. And it does that, it puts a cocoon around it. And then something amazing happens within it. The interior of that life form, the caterpillar, then starts to dissolve and break down into a grey, featureless, jelly-like gunge. So that is actually the death of the caterpillar. It is dying inside the cocoon. That is the impending death of the caterpillar. But there is something amazing happening, which is apparently dotted around the interior of the cocoon. They begin to say, something yummy and nutritious. They begin to feed on the grey gunge. That's what they do. They begin to feed, multiply, grow together in little groups and develop into specific small groups as in the upper part of that diagram. But here's something very relevant to the scene today on the planet, which is that the immune system of the dying caterpillar recognises these foreign cells and begins to attack them. So is this not a metaphor for what we get in the world? We have cells that are spiritually inspired. People are bringing forward a new agenda, if you like, a new purpose. But then the old attacks them. And the more different they are, the more light they bring in, the more they're attacked by the immune system of the old paradigm. So it's a brilliant metaphor for what's actually happening on the planet today. And then, of course, as the caterpillar dies, completes its death process, the imaginal cells grow more and more numerous and group into these little bodies around the thing, and they organise themselves until you have in the bottom there, you have the nascent germinal cells of a new something, or a new creature. What could this be? Why are these so organised? Well, this is what they end up being, of course, as we imagine. This is what happens. It grows into this incredible form, all folded up inside the shell, the place where the caterpillar died, the old paradigm died, but this new wonderful form developed and grew, and when it came out and stretched its wings as they do, it could fly. If you told a caterpillar, you'll be able to fly one day, it would say, who, me, how, but here, through this extraordinary crisis that led to its own death, something extraordinary was born out of it. Andrew Harvey is putting to us the image, the metaphor, that this is a very potently inspiring symbol of exactly what the opportunity is for us here on planet Earth right now. We have the dying of the old, but we have the birth of the new, and all these spiritually inspired groups, people doing things in new ways, like the ones who want to work in doing permaculture and working for peace and caring about the ecology. All these things where they care about relationship, spirituality, the earth, and other life forms. These are the new ways. And there's one more aspect of this metaphor before I leave it, which is that when the monarch butterfly has got, say, halfway through this process, some kind-hearted people have thought, it's having such a struggle. They watch the butterfly, obviously in a tremendous struggle to unfold its wings. How about I help it so that I won't help it to unfold its wings. Well, you probably know what I'm going to say, but with those who haven't quite got there yet, if you help a butterfly to unfold its wings, I'm sad to say it is never able to fly. So you see how that applies to us as well. In that sense, we actually need the death throes now. We actually need it to wake us up, to challenge us as conscious beings, to link together in our little groups and bigger groups, to draw forth the sword out of the stone. That's a wonderful metaphor, also in our English literature, to draw the sword of atomic fire out of the stone of our beings. And to develop this overall vision a bit further, there's a pregnant little phrase about the circle of compassion, which is actually used by two great men. One was Albert Schweitzer and the other was Albert Einstein. Schweitzer's one was at the top, that until he extends the circle of his compassion to all living things, man will not himself find peace. And Schweitzer, as you probably know, did wonderful work in Africa, probably about 100 years ago. Now Einstein wrote something which is longer, but he had to be a mystic as well as a scientist, because he was explaining about the way when we experience ourselves to be individual beings, it's like a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. Actually, it operates as a prison, which restricts us to our personal desires and to affection for the few people nearest to us. But he says our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion, to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Now this relates in many ways because the problems, as we have perceived and have heard many times, and do with tears, is because of our identification and operational, basically just caring about ourselves and nobody else type of thing when it's at its pathological worst. And the thing is that why did this circle of identification? Now who was it wrote that the path of yoga may be traced in terms of identification? Where did I read that decades ago? I don't know, but it has a lot of deep meaning. Which is that what you identify with, the actual self-states and the being that you identify with yourself as being through the cycle of your lives and life after life, and how that being that you think that you are can expand and does, until it embraces the whole, or you identify with a stone or a flower. This, I think, relates to this idea that there's this circle of those people there care, these people in this room matter to me, or those people in Africa really matters to me, that those people are going hungry. So as the circle of our compassion does expand, then the possibility of altruistic action and working together in networks of grace is visibly increased. So that was a wonderful phrase, I think, well worth remembering. So what did Andrew Harvey recommend? Well, he's a man who's investigated a lot of different religious pathways, and he's been in the monasteries of the East, a variety of different processes, and he's trod away through many fiery experiences that he described in his book about this sacred activism, The Hope. He describes some times when, well, one was he had a vision of a Christ at the end of a church, and there he was before it, and it spoke to him, a golden ray shot forth and struck him in the heart, almost explosively, and then he heard a voice which spent the next 5 minutes stripping him down to the bone, virtually outlining and now in certain terms what a worm is being. I won't try and describe it, but in any case, it stripped any remaining pretensions from him, and he left that experience both decimated and inspired, and it was a transformational moment in his life. I mention that because he has been through a few fiery experiences himself. And so what he recommends toward becoming a spiritually inspired activist is to make sure that you make space for the divine in your life by whatever name or whatever way you can see that, whether it is the one life, time-honoured Word of God, ground of all being, source, the source with capital S, whatever words it is, or love, whatever it inspires you. Serve the divine, make sure that you apportion part of your time, life, and energy to actually serving the divine in a way that you can, in your circle. Sometimes there's a temptation to think, if I had more time and money, I would go to Africa. I don't know why I'm talking about Africa because you're on the room, Valerie, thank you, mate. Go to some far-off place. If I only had the time and money, I could do these wonderful heroic acts in some far-off place like Botswana or the Sudan or something, But I can't do anything like that because I'm just an ordinary family person. I suppose, one day I might become a servant. No, your service is to be done right where you are. And if your family duties are in a family, well, do them spiritually. Serve the divine in your children, your partners, the people in your family. So wherever you are, whatever is within a reasonable and non-crazily heroic reach, serve the divine man. And yourself, because if you aren't a functioning unit, well, you won't be serving anything. So again, he says, make space for yourself. Do some practices. Have some things like Tai Chi, make sure you meditate daily, or prayer, whatever it is that is your tap route into the divine. And in fact, a substantial part of this book is a list of spiritual practices and ways of integrating them into physical activity as well. Serve others, serve your local theosophical society and garden clubs, whatever's around you, neighbourhood groups in your street, and serve the global community, the global consciousness. So those are the 5 main aspects that he urges us to make sure we apportion some of our time and energy towards. And carrying on with that, more specifically, make sure you can, when the time is right, join together with people in groups for action, kindred groups of action. As I said before, people linked by skill or profession or passion or indeed a heartbreak. Engage in spiritual practice of some sort. It might be making sure you walk in the grass in the morning in bare feet in the dew, or walking through a forest alone, hugging trees, whatever it is. Make sure you do it every day, because the human mind is bombarded by daily life, is it not? I don't know about you, but I find that I can be in a very nice calm state in the morning, but about 5 hours later I'm thinking, oh golly, where did that go? And you've had a few challenges along the way. It's good to ground yourself again, and if you possibly can, endeavour to do another one in the evening as well. Really makes a difference. Indeed, it makes it more efficient, I believe. In other words, meditating for 10 minutes twice a day achieves 4 times the results of meditating, how am I trying to say that? For twice as long, 10 minutes a day. I'm not sure if I got the maths right there, but the idea is it's actually just more efficient to talk yourself up spiritually more than once during the day. Perhaps in just little ways, like for 20 seconds in a quiet patch. Tune inwards, be aware of your body, think back to a beautiful piece of music that inspires you maybe, or a beloved work of art, or a beloved child or something, beloved grandparent, whatever it is that grounds you back into that heart connection, because that then puts you back in touch with that linkage between the body and the everyday self, the realm of the higher self and the everyday self. In the ardent turning of the soul towards the divine. Now, Blavatsky used those words very early on in the Key to Theosophy, page 10. Now, she's actually talking about the way the spiritual wisdom of Theosophy was gained by the ancients, which it was out of the ecstasy, which is the experience of being at that level, of being conscious and present in the realm of Buddhi and wisdom, and experiencing it, and then bringing gems out of that realm into the world and turning them into words. And she uses those words. I think this is one of the Platonists, one of the Neoplatonists, which that this state is reached by the ardent turning of the soul towards the divine. So I suggest to you that you discover the ways that you feel a bit ardent, the ways that you feel drawn, whether it's their beauty, love, or we've already mentioned all these things. But I do think that's the thing that draws you on in the meditations, gets you up in the morning. Oh, I don't want to get out of bed this morning. It's only going to be 5 degrees outside or something. Oh, I think I'll have another 10 minutes in bed. Who hasn't been those places? So, these are the times for you to tap back into your ardent sense of, I want to be closer. And one person that I respect and love dearly put it as, I want nothing more than to disappear into the heart of God. Whatever it is that inspires you. That's got some magic to it, those words. So. But of course, as I began this talk by saying, it's the balanced human being which we're really after. The one in whom that fiery heart energy is accomplished by just as clear and fiery an intellect, and just as healthy a body, a physical instrument, providing a channel for that fiery spirit to increasingly descend. This is drawing to a close now. About 3, we've run a truly time to close. So I'll leave you with an aspiring image which is out of another organisation, which just indicates what the flower of humanity, when it's operating as a holistic, healed, whole, global consciousness, might look for in its different departments of activity, like the infrastructure of things and spiritually inspired justice, spiritually clean media. Relations, that's right. Science, spiritually inspired science. The spirit bits in the middle. The light flows out into all these departments of life, you see. Spirituality itself, spiritually inspired spiritual activity. The arts, spiritually inspired arts. What's this one? Education, definitely spiritually inspired education. The environment, of course. All these things spiritually inspired. Government, not too much, not too little, just enough to coordinate things properly. Health, spiritualized healing and health processes and techniques going on in life in the world. So that's the note I want to leave you on, which is one of that despite the immense, multifaceted challenges on the planet facing us today, it is a call up. What did you do? Sorry, that's private. But anyway, it's like a call from the heart of reality to us to waken and pull the sword out of the stone and get going, turning our grey gunja, our caterpillar, into a brilliant new butterfly. So having mixed probably half a dozen metaphors before lunch, before dinner. This is not the end, but it's the beginning, I suppose.